press conference, and allow me at the outset to start by apologizing for having to push it back to 3:30 and then starting a few minutes late. We have literally just finished the weekly cabinet meeting where there were a number of very important items as usual that were discussed. I have come here this afternoon to address the population on two energy related matters, one of which I have not had a chance or an opportunity to look at my phone, but I saw that some of you have been asking questions about, and that is with respect to what is going on in Washington, D.C., and in particular how it may affect certain decisions being taken there, how it may affect what we have been doing here in Trinidad, in particular with respect to Venezuela. But the first issue that I've come to report to the population on is something that we spent a considerable amount of time considering in cabinet today, and was one of the reasons why we ran a bit late, because of the robust conversation and interrogation that was taking place. And this is with respect to the refinery. Cabinet has today taken a decision with respect to the Guaracara refinery and how it is we propose we should go forward in dealing with it. Allow me at the outset to just put things in context with respect to Petrotrin. And I'm smiling because I actually got an opportunity to refer to an op-ed that we had done. I had authored some time ago that set out the whole Petrotrin story, but I think it is important for the population in particular. Just allow me the liberty to provide the context. Petrotrin was an integrated, what we call national oil company of Trinidad and Tobago. And when this PNM administration came in 2015, one of the first things we were faced with is having to deal with the Petrotrin and what was going on in particular with our oil sector. By then, you all would all recall, there had already begun a downward decline in oil production. At the time, Petrotrin was both doing exploration and production, as well as the refinery side of life. So it was a fully integrated value chain company. Unfortunately, by then, oil production had begun to decline in Trinidad and Tobago, and the refinery had started registering losses, which had begun from as early as 2014, but by 2016, it had become quite significant. In 2014, Petrotrin had registered a loss of $361.3 million, having gone through a profitable period before. By 2015, the loss had climbed to $1.2 billion by 2015. We had also seen a decline in our total domestic oil production from approximately 144,000 barrels of oil per day in 2005 to 98,000 barrels of oil per day in 2010, and that had dropped to a further 78,000 barrels of oil by 2015. This is significant. So between 2010 to 2015, we had lost over 20,000 barrels of oil per day in our oil production. Petrotrin's own production of oil had declined from approximately 64,000 barrels of oil per day in 2006 to 42,000 barrels of oil per day in 2016. Now understand that the Petrotrin refinery, the Guaracara refinery as we now call it, has the ability to process 175,000 barrels of oil per day. And you are dropped now to Petrotrin, the company, producing 42,000 barrels of oil per day by 2016, which meant a necessity to import crude oil as the input into the refinery, upwards of 100,000 barrels of oil per day on open market pricing. So by then, unfortunately, Petrotrin had become very unprofitable. Not only was it declining oil production, but the cost of increasing cost of importation of crude as the input into the refinery was leading to a loss of between $5 to $7 a barrel of oil being processed. So you hear very frequently this conversation about a net forex earner, and it was profitable, etc. For every barrel of oil that was being processed and refined by Petrotrin, and you're purchasing 100,000 barrels of oil to put into the refinery, $5 to $7 a barrel of oil. In 2016, Petrotrin registered a loss of $4.3 billion, which meant that it had incurred cumulative losses of approximately $5.9 billion in a 3-year period. By then, we all knew that something had to be done. Of course, there was this looming bond payment, which you all know about, $850 million to be paid in August 2019. So we knew something had to be done. It was in February 2017 that the cabinet took a decision to appoint a committee, which we now call the Lashley Committee, to take a look at the operations of Petrotrin and to come up, and it actually says here on the minute from February 23rd, 2017, to the appointment of a team to conduct a review of the operations of Petrotrin and to make recommendations for its restructuring. So very frequently you hear a narrative where people are saying, oh, there was no recommendation in the restructuring of Petrotrin. From the outset, we realized there had to be a restructuring of Petrotrin. And in 2017, the cabinet set up a committee under the chairman, Mr. Selwyn Lashley, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries at the time, that included Professor Chan Baran Sharma, Ms. Helen Drayton, Mr. Robert Riley, Mr. Wilfred Espine, Mr. Gregory Marchand, who is a representative of the OWTU, and Mr. David Abdullah, who is also a representative of the OWTU. So in February 2017, that committee was set up. They made their recommendations by November 2017, months later, for the restructuring of Petrotrin. And as you all know, that report was also laid in Parliament. At every step of the way, we have been completely open and transparent with respect to how we operated, firstly with the restructuring of Petrotrin, then the creation of the entities that we all now know, TPHL, Heritage, Paria and Guaracara, and then of course turning our attention to the refinery. What was interesting when I was looking at it, in October 2018, Cabinet approved for persons from the Ministry of Finance, the technocrats at the Ministry of Finance, in October and November 2018, to go up and meet with Moody's and Standard & Poor's with the specific mandate to deal with the restructuring of Petrotrin. Because by then, the rating agencies had said, if you do not restructure Petrotrin, and that bond of $850 million to be paid in August 2019 could not be successfully done, it was not only going to affect Petrotrin's ratings, but it was going to affect our sovereign ratings. So we again had it emphasized to us the need to restructure Petrotrin, and the only way the capital markets would refinance that $850 million bond was if a comprehensive restructuring plan could be presented to the world, and in particular those in the financial world outside of Trinidad and Tobago, that would satisfy investors that there was a chance of success of the newly restructured entity being profitable. It was in November 2018, on the 8th of November 2018, that Cabinet took the decision to restructure Petrotrin, formulating a holding company called Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited, TPHL. We then had Paria to deal with fuel supply, the importation of fuel, the export of 50% of that fuel to external markets, earning foreign exchange, 50% roughly staying here for our domestic consumption. And at this stage, of course, to remind the population, not a single day went by in that seamless transition where we could not all get fuel at the pumps in Trinidad and Tobago. Heritage was set up as what we call an exploration and production company. And as you all know, both Heritage and Paria have been profitable, with Heritage paying billions of dollars in royalty, SPT, taxes, but also billions in profit, whilst paying the refinancing of the $850 million bond that was successfully done without a government guarantee. That would not have happened, ladies and gentlemen, if we did not restructure Petrotrade. We had an $850 million bond before August 2019 that was successfully restructured without a government guarantee. Nothing affected our sovereign rating coming out of all of this. That bond has since been refinanced once again with better terms, and every payment has been made throughout the success of Heritage as a profitable exploration and production company. That left the asset of the refinery, which was set up in a company called Guaracara. As you, the population, know, and you, the members of the media, know, we went out first with an attempt starting in and around 2019, where we invited proposals to the world at large to come take a look at the refinery, see if you could restart it. In the meantime, the TPHL group continued to preserve the refinery. We all know the first round, the first go at it, Patriotic was the preferred bidder. Patriotic Energies Limited, Companies Limited, which is really a company that was set up, a special purpose vehicle set up by the OWTU. An evaluation committee was put in place by the cabinet with a number of experts, lawyers, persons of expertise from the field, people who knew the refinery, public servants, etc., to negotiate with Patriotic. Unfortunately, on that first round, it simply did not get across the line. The government did try everything in its power to work with Patriotic. We had even given a period of exclusivity, but unfortunately, as you all know, it did not happen. I've heard it being suggested by the normal naysayers and by the normal ones who like to, as we say, throw shade, that the government did that in 2020 as some sort of political ploy for an election. That was not so then, and this, as I've come to address you today, I say frontally, is not so now either. We are concerned that if there is an opportunity to restart the refinery by the right entity, that we are able to do so. But one thing we are certain, this government will not get back into or put the taxpayers and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago into the expense of trying to run a refinery. Anyone who does their homework and their research will see that even their newer refineries across the world, refineries with better technology, the margins on refineries has narrowed significantly, and many entities who have the sources of supply of crude oil, including some of the major multinational oil and gas companies, have been closing down refineries across the world, including some of the most technologically advanced refineries, for example, in Europe. If you do a search, you will say recently a number of entities, some of who operate in Trinidad, as our larger major oil and gas companies, have shut down refineries across the world. So we are prepared to assist by providing the asset, that is the refinery, to an operator who can cross the many thresholds and hurdles to restart the refinery. And that is the exercise that we've been embarking upon. The Prime Minister and myself have spoken at many energy conferences as close by as Guyana and across the world, making it known to persons who operate in the industry that there's a refinery in Trinidad and Tobago that's being preserved. Come take a look at it, and if you can, restart it. And that is what led to a number of unsolicited, fast forward now to where we are, a number of unsolicited proposals that we kept receiving at the governmental level, at the Trinidad Petroleum Holdings level, from across the world with respect to the restarting of the refinery. We took a decision with respect to those proposals that we were receiving to set up another evaluation committee to receive these proposals, to put a date at which there would be a close-off for what we call expressions of interest. All who are interested in the refinery, come forward, take a look at it, and see if you're able to do it. Before we get to there was another attempt. So the first attempt was in 2019 to 2020, Project Soca, where we had gotten into conversation and negotiations with the preferred bidder, Patriotic Energies and Technologies, who unfortunately at that time were unable to raise the capital for the transaction. We tried again between 2021 and 2022 with Project Calypso, which was then terminated when it was determined that the preferred bidder, you all may recall the name, Quanten Consortium LLC, was unable to raise the capital for this transaction. So during the period of 23-24, we were receiving these unsolicited proposals. We opened a process for an EOI, expression of interest. And then we put a cutoff date for that expression of interest, at which point in time we would no longer accept offers and proposals being made for the refinery. We had received, I think it was by May we had put the cutoff date by May of 2024. A total of 10 parties were invited to participate, and a decision was taken to extend the date for receiving the EOIs. You all may recall at that time, one of the entities that had actually put in or was expressing an interest and had actually come here to take a look at the refinery was the company of Jindal Steel and Power out of India. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, Jindal Steel was attacked relentlessly, unfortunately, by the opposition, and all sorts of aspersions were cast on the Jindal family, and in particular, Mr. Jindal. I'd like to tell the population the fourth wealthiest woman in the world is Mrs. Jindal, the mother, the matriarch of that empire. The same Mr. Jindal who was literally run out of town, unfortunately, by the UNC opposition, as he confirmed in a letter to the Honorable Prime Minister when he offered his regrets not to participate in the proposals that were taking place, has recently been awarded the first contract by the government of India for privatization and the building of nuclear power. He is also an extremely successful businessman that has been making waves, not only in India but outside of India. We, the citizens, cannot afford to run away investment, especially foreign investment, in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is something that we, the citizens, must take very, very careful note of when we're deciding how we're going to deal with our future, as to who is best poised, who has Trinidad and Tobago's best interests at heart. And that is a very serious thing, akin to exactly what happened with the Sandals franchise when they were coming to invest in Tobago. These unwarranted attacks, were there questions in terms of a former charge with respect to Mr. Jindal? The answer is yes, and nobody denied that. Are there persons sitting in Parliament who are under criminal charge and others under criminal investigation in the UNC opposition? The answer is yes. Does that mean that we should not allow persons, if they can fulfill all that needs to be, and it was an entity, a legal entity, Jindal, to invest in Trinidad and Tobago? That is a question that we need to answer and that you need to answer. Was that the best decision or not? By the end of the process, in May 2024, there were 10 EOIs put in by a number of persons: Columbus Refinery, Trinidad and Tobago, CRO Consortium, GN Fenceline Consortium, IEM Sales and Services, Inca Refining, Integras Group, Nautical Partners, Oando PLC, Patriotic Energy Services Company Limited, Turner Industries. What we did is we set up a committee under the chairmanship of High Commissioner Vishnu Danpal, a very experienced permanent secretary whose last posting in the public service was as the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, with years of experience, as well as a number of other technocrats, expertise in the form of lawyers. So we had Mr. Vishnu Danpal chairing that committee, Ms. Sandra Fraser, permanent secretary then in the Ministry of Energy, now at the Ministry of National Security, and Mr. Dexter Jagannath, permanent secretary at the Ministry of Finance, Ms. Melissa Ingerfield, a partner at M. Hamelsmith and Company, attorney at law, Mr. Vincent Pereira, former Upstream CEO. You all knew him from Woodside, formerly BHP. Mr. Selwyn Lashley, former Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Energy. Mr. Jimmy Wong, Senior Debt Analyst at the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Christopher Narayan Thomas, a Commercial Manager at Paria. Mr. Klein Laborde from Guaracara Refinery. Mr. Anil Singh from Heritage Petroleum, and they were allowed to second other people. That was the evaluation committee set up to look at these 10 proposals, these 10 letters of interest that had been received. It was in September 2024 that the evaluation committee came back to cabinet and said, look, we've looked at all of the proposals, we've evaluated the proposals, and we have recommendations to make. They met with every single one of the entities, some more than once. You may recall that Patriotic Energy Services Company that participated in this process unfortunately had produced as part of their documentation, and this should not be forgotten because I see they're very, very active in other arenas now, produced a wire transfer, a document purporting to be a wire transfer for US $1.5 billion as part of their package and as part of their proposal. Of course, when due diligence was done, it was found that that document purporting to be a proof of a wire transfer of $1.5 billion was completely fraudulent. TPHL and Heritage were advised to pursue that matter with the criminal authorities and law enforcement, and they would be best in a position to advise whether that was done or not. The evaluation committee went through a very detailed process, and the outcome of it was they had suggested, and it was accepted by cabinet, that there were 3 entities that they believed were possible opportunities and entities with the wherewithal to restart the refinery. Those 3 proposals came from the entities CRO Consortium, Oando Trading, and Inca Refining. Inca Refining is a US-based entity. Oando Trading, as I am certain everyone knows by now, and in particular the members of the media, is a publicly traded entity on the stock exchanges of both Johannesburg in South Africa as well as Lagos in Nigeria. CRO Consortium, which is a consortium comprising 3 separate entities, one of which is Trinidadian element and then 2 other foreign elements. We accepted the suggestion by the evaluation committee in September and told them, okay, now proceed to invite more detailed proposals, analyze those proposals, and come back to cabinet with any suggestions as to whether this can or it cannot work. I'm happy to report that the evaluation committee did come back to cabinet in the past few weeks after holding a number of meetings in the post-EOI phase, which was the going out for detailed proposals. They held a total of 8 meetings, which brought the total number of their meetings to 26. They looked at the recommendations, they looked at the proposals, they went through. They've always had Scotia operating out of Houston, Scotia International, as one of their advisors, international advisors, in addition to the evaluation committee that I just named. As a result of that, within the last few weeks, they came to cabinet. They sent a report to cabinet in the last few weeks where what they said is they had narrowed it down to Oando and the CRO Consortium. Unfortunately, Inca did not put in that detailed proposal by the cutoff date, and therefore they were eliminated. They spent the next few weeks, next few months, engaged with both Oando as well as CRO, and then came to cabinet saying that these are the 2 and putting before us the pros and the cons of both with a recommendation. The cabinet then set up a subcommittee under the chairmanship of Minister Robinson Regis, a subcommittee with a number of members of cabinet many of whom are legally qualified, and then others like the Minister of Trade and others who obviously it made sense to have them participate in it. That subcommittee met with the evaluation committee, asked them a number of further questions, and to provide a written report that can then be submitted to the committee. That was done, and that was completed over the past week. Over the past week, what that evaluation committee under the chairmanship of High Commissioner Dan Paul additionally did is some additional due diligence. Those of you who operate in the international world of finance and mergers and acquisitions would be familiar with a company, an entity called Dun & Bradstreet. And this company is a company you go to and you ask them to do some research and due diligence. That was done on both CRO as well as Oando. That was then brought to Cabinet. The subcommittee of Cabinet, consideration was given, and that subcommittee of Cabinet today made a recommendation to the full Cabinet, and that is what we deliberated on today. Ladies and gentlemen, it is quite expected, as we've already seen, that there would be a number of attacks carried out on the entities, and I've already seen it suggested, for example, that Oando had found itself in certain difficulties, and they had actually been delisted on both the Johannesburg Stock Exchange in South Africa and then in 2024 on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Those were some of the questions that were asked. That was some of the due diligence done. Those two delistings was a result on both occasions of not filing their financials in accordance with the regulations on time. Both were subsequently satisfied. Both, I think the previous one was in 2023 in South Africa and then in late 2024 in Nigeria. In addition to that, Oando has recently completed acquisitions in Nigeria. The first for US $1.5 billion of the ConocoPhillips assets and fields that were being exploited for oil in Nigeria. As you're aware, Nigeria is one of the largest oil producers in the world. Oando acquired ConocoPhillips operations, their asset base in Nigeria, for $1.5 billion. In addition to that, after that acquisition for $750 million, they also acquired a JIP, another smaller multinational oil and gas company's operations. Oando is now one of the largest domestic producers of oil in Nigeria. The oil from Nigeria is also the oil, one of the crude oils that was being purchased for our refinery in Trinidad and Tobago, because a refinery cannot just take any and every blend or type of crude oil. The Nigerian crude oil, elements of it, work in our refinery. One of the issues that you have in running a refinery is you have to make sure you have that crude oil source to refine in the refinery. Both Oando and CRO put forward their proposals. Those proposals were looked at by the evaluation committee. CRO had elements of its proposal where they were bringing in international persons who ran refineries, etc. And let me, at this stage, if you would permit me, just touch base on the findings of the evaluation committee, which is what Cabinet took a look at today. The evaluation committee noted in the proposals put forward by Oando and CRO that both companies agreed to a lease type arrangement for a stipulated period. It was also noted that each of the companies had gained similar scores for its experience and capability in operating and maintaining a refinery, demonstrated by the leadership and management that was outlined. Very detailed org charts were put forward. When it got to the financing is really twofold. The first thing that needs to be done is an asset integrity report, where somebody goes in, the experts look at it, say what needs to be done to the refinery and the assets, what would be the proposal to get it restarted, what would be the cost, etc. This can vary from single digits of millions to as much as it is assumed and it is proposed as much as $20 million. Both were told, well, how would you carry out your asset integrity assessment? There's then also the working capital needed for the restart and a realistic operation plan. And Oando's score, mainly due to its track record of raising funds in the upstream sector, those two deals that I just spoke about, $1.5 billion US and then 750 million US, helped it rate on a higher score there. The company is not envisaged to have any external financing needs for the working capital. Both of these things were explored, and the evaluation committee recommended to Cabinet that Oando Trading DMCC be the preferred bidder for the lease of the Guaracara refinery. The evaluation committee presented that to the committee chaired by Minister Robinson Regis, who met, and certain recommendations as a result of those deliberations were made today to the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. And I can tell you that today the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago has taken the following decisions. We have noted the Evaluation Committee's recommendation of Oando Trading DMCC Oando as the preferred bidder for the lease of the Guaracara Refining Company Limited. We have also noted the proposal for the lease type commercial arrangement proposed, which sees the Guaracara Refinery operating alongside Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited by way of granting access to Paria's associated logistic assets via commercial arrangement between Paria and the lessee, which lease arrangement would allow the government a number of things: to retain ownership while granting usage rights to the preferred bidder to generate consistent revenue. So we're not giving up Paria. There were some entities along the way, it became obvious to the evaluation committee they wanted to get hold of Paria for bunkering purposes and really were not interested in restarting the refinery. We, the government, were adamant in our discussions with the evaluation committee that we have to protect the assets of Paria to also always ensure that we can provide domestic fuel to our population, and to make sure that anybody really interested in restarting the refinery wouldn't just take Paria's assets, which is one of the problems Patriotic had faced at a certain time, and then not get to the restarting of the refinery. They are also going to reduce the burden on the state to preserve and upgrade the asset, and then they're going to create avenues for flexibility in the future and a number of other areas. The Cabinet then took the following further decisions after noting what had been recommended. Today, the Cabinet took the decision to inform TPHL of a non-objection to the recommendation of the Evaluation Committee and its proposals for the sale or lease of the refinery and the ancillary assets of Guaracara. We also agreed that TPHL should consider the recommendations of the said Evaluation Committee and proceed accordingly. So today the Cabinet, on the basis of all that I've described, have agreed that we are going to inform, and we will immediately inform TPHL of our non-objection to the pursuit of discussions with Oando to see and for them to negotiate for the sale or the lease of the refinery and the restart of the refinery after doing an appropriate asset integrity report. So ladies and gentlemen, after all that is said and done, and hopefully a better understanding of the process and the very careful process that the government has employed, the ball is now in TPHL's court, with us accepting at the Cabinet level the recommendation that they pursue a relationship with the Oando Group. We, the Cabinet, was satisfied, and it was actually pointed out in the Dun & Bradstreet report that there were 50, for example, negative media reports on open source with respect to the Oando Group. But the Evaluation Committee, having received that, were able to engage the group and to satisfy themselves and to provide us with a report which satisfied us that there was not sufficient evidence, or what had been claimed had been satisfied, and really it was that they were delisted on Johannesburg and the Lagos Stock Exchange, and they're back on, and that they have been proceeding. And I've just listed two of their recent transactions for $1.5 billion US and 750 million US dollars, showing the type of enterprise. Trinidad and Tobago fits perfectly, it appears, in their global operations and what it is that they intend to do. So that is the decision of Cabinet with respect to the refinery. And I ask you, the population, as a concerned citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, now with a lot of responsibility for how we go forward in the future, take very careful note of those who will once again try to scuttle international investment in Trinidad and Tobago. It's not the first time, it's not going to be the last time. But quite frankly, it is quite irresponsible behavior. No one is against, if there are issues to be raised, if there are concerns to be had, those being raised in the public space and the public domain. The government has listened, they were raised with the evaluation committee. The evaluation committee did further due diligence and were able to satisfy the cabinet that those were not issues that we should be concerned with at this stage. Obviously, at the end, I'll take questions with respect to the refinery. If you would permit me, because it seems in the last 24 hours that there have been certain developments that may affect us here in Trinidad and Tobago, in particular with what we have been working on since 2017 with respect to cross-border gas from Venezuela. We saw yesterday that coming out of Washington, President Trump and his administration appear to have taken a decision with respect to an OFAC license granted to Chevron. What was missed is a few months ago, that license under the President Trump's administration had been extended, it had been rolled over, but it appears as though at this stage a decision was taken to reverse that. There is a winding up period. I have been in touch with persons that we've been working with on the continuation of our transactions with respect to both the United States as well as Venezuela. So we started Cabinet a little late this morning because I spent the morning engaged in conversations, getting a better idea of, because like you, like the media, like the citizens, I too am concerned as how will things affect Trinidad and Tobago. At this stage, there has been no indication of there being any negative effect on Trinidad and Tobago. We have always said it is impossible to predict the future. It is impossible to predict how certain administrations, what decisions they may take, etc. We have remained completely engaged. This morning, one of my conversations was with the Shell Group. We continue to do the work on Dragon. Both of us are reaching out through the various contacts we have. I had reached out to the US government through certain channels here in Trinidad and their proposals for engagement with Secretary Rubio's office, etc., which was always part of the plan. I see that Secretary Rubio did put out, I think is now called an X, a tweet, just after midnight last night. Today, pursuant to at POTUS directive, I am providing foreign policy guidance to terminate all Biden-era oil and gas licenses that have shamefully bankrolled the illegitimate Maduro regime. That is what we saw, the same way you have seen it. It is talking about the Secretary of State putting forward certain policy as how it should be dealt with going forward. What I can tell you, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, is we, the government, continue to be engaged. We continue to work every angle we can. It is understood by many levels how important this deal, let's use the Dragon deal as the example, because that's what everyone seems to be focused on, and our OFAC license, etc. How important that is, not only for the energy security of Trinidad and Tobago, but also the stability of the region, CARICOM, as well as South America, and also the conversations we've consistently had with the United States of America, how it also affects the geopolitics, not only of the region, but also as far away as Europe, as well as some other entities. I speak in this way to let you know, population, that we continue to be engaged. We're very aware of how important it is and who the decision makers are, and we will continue to do all that we can. Can we provide any assurance at this stage? The answer is obviously no. Are we engaged with the right people we believe? We think we are, and we will continue to work. And at every step of the way, if there is something for us to report, we will. And I'd also like to tell you, the same way when things changed in 2018, 2019, we managed the relationships, we were successful thereafter. This government will remain committed to the people of Trinidad and Tobago because we understand how important it is to be able to access these resources. And again, it was very, very disheartening, but telling, illustrative, to see how the leader of the opposition is trying to turn the whole narrative in ways that are going to be potentially destructive to Trinidad and Tobago. I read initially unable to believe that the type of language that was being used would come from as high an office as the leader of the opposition yesterday in an attack on the substantive prime minister and the things that were being said about the substantive prime minister, Dr. Rowley. And that is something I condemn, and I am certain all civic-minded, sensible citizens in Trinidad and Tobago will feel the same way in condemning it. This deal and this transaction on cross-border gas is not for PNM, it is not for UNC, it is not for any political entity. It is for you the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. This deal and that gas being delivered in 2027 is what is going to help us with the foreign exchange, is what's going to help us continue paying the bills on your behalf, continuing ensuring that there's drugs in the hospital or children continue to receive education. And that is what we've consistently been fighting for. So all of those who want to call sanctions, all of those who want to attack the Venezuelan government from small Trinidad and Tobago, our closest neighbor, that can never be good for Trinidad and Tobago. And what happens? What happens if there's a change in government and those same people who have consistently attacked President Maduro and his administration are the ones now who have to go and say, hey, by the way, we want to continue doing business for Trinidad and Tobago. I can tell you, being the one firsthand who has been dealing with this personally over the last few years, it is not something that is assisting Trinidad and Tobago, and certainly it may lead to the closing of the door with that continued behavior. So that's something you need to consider, people of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you. I'll take some questions on these two items.
Afternoon, Minister Young. If I may ask you one question on each of the subjects you addressed. And the first one is about the statement from the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. I want to focus on the last clause in his statement, which is the references to the Biden era oil and gas licenses that have shamefully bankrolled the illegitimate Maduro regime. So the question is, has the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago or either of its international partners in the cross-border, near-border gas issues, quote-unquote, bankrolled the Venezuelan government?
The answer to that is no. We have entered into a commercial transaction, a license that has been published in the Venezuelan Gazette for 30 years with Dragon. We just completed one in July of last year with respect to Coquina, in the Coquina mannequin field. Again, that will be published in their Gazette. And you can see very clearly there what are the cash transactions. Until the gas field starts up and you start to pay things like royalty, etc., we certainly don't fall into any large payments or payments being made to the Venezuelan government. What you're seeing here is the current U.S. administration, the Secretary of State. That is his language. It is not for me to interpret it or try to suggest what is going on there. I am sure as things begin to unfold, because he says, you're focused on the latter part, I'm focused on the top part. I am providing foreign policy guidance. That is the next step. What is the foreign policy guidance? And I can assure you that we in Trinidad and Tobago will try to engage, and we will always be advocating for what is best for Trinidad and Tobago, for the CARICOM region, and also for energy and national security issues.
Neither the government of Trinidad and Tobago nor BP or Shell have made any payments to Venezuela, the Venezuelan government, or any state company in Venezuela.
And then that is not what you just asked, you know.
Well,
You asked, okay, well, so now,
asking a different
but you said, if I am saying that, I never said that. You asked me if we bankroll, which has a very different definition. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Payments have been made with respect to Dragon. Can I tell you what the exact payments were made? I can't, not at this stage, because that is being handled by Shell and by NGC. With every license, including the other day in Trinidad and Tobago, you all would have seen if you were paying attention, this government granted, and I signed as the Minister of Energy, 2 production sharing contracts with EOG, something that they have not done for 20 years. I can report to the population of Trinidad and Tobago here today, immediately on that signature of mine being put and the signature of EOG, significant sums of US dollars were paid by EOG to the government of Trinidad and Tobago in something called a signing bonus. The same thing has happened with all of the other PSCs we do, every exploration and production license. Would that be considered significant? Are they bankrolling? That is a normal course of business in oil and gas sector. You sign a license, there are payments to be made. You sign a license, there are fees to be paid for acreage, for example. So even when people are not doing exploration, when they're not doing seismic work, they pay a rent to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. They pay a number of cents, depending on the acreage, per acre, which translates to millions of US dollars. That is the normal course of business, and that is what would have been done by Shell and NGC. As to the exact amounts, I can't say what they have been. Payments have been made, correct.
So the question on the refinery is, what are the financial terms of the lease arrangements?
Good question. So what we have said at this stage is TPHL, you go now, first of all, assess what the evaluation committee has come up with, and then you make a determination, because it's TPHL's asset, as to whether you want to pursue the relationship with Rwanda and get into those levels of details. It was a proposal put forward, so we know it's not a sale of the refinery, it's a lease of the refinery, which quite frankly to me as the Minister of Energy makes sense, because it's better you use your money to invest in restarting the refinery and trying to buy the refinery, etc. So those details are details to be worked out.
Details of the lease arrangements were not part of the evaluation process.
They would have put forward certain levels of detail, but exactly as we asked as the subcommittee meeting with the evaluation committee, for example, what is the rate for electricity? Because as you know, the refinery will have to a certain amount of electricity. How much gas is needed? How much water is needed? Those are not the levels of detail. So again, with a lease arrangement, we know it's going to be a lease. What is the proposal for the lease? What are the details? That is to be worked out.
How long is this going to be for?
Those are things to be worked out. All right, any other questions?
You mentioned that your personal involvement in Dragon Gas and going to Venezuela and the rhetoric coming from the opposition leader, according to you, is not going well for us. Has anybody, President Maduro, anyone representing his administration, responded to, commented on what the opposition leader has said about Dragon Gas?
One of the things in international diplomacy is when you engage with world leaders and you have certain conversations, until you get the agreement to talk outside of that, it's best you don't. But I can tell you, even on previous trips, previous conversations that were had, there always was a level of concern, because when you stood up in Parliament every week and you heard the throwing of insults at a world leader, because at the end of the day, President Maduro is a leader. He sits on the largest oil reserves in the world. And you have people on the other side, the UNC opposition, attacking relentlessly and saying Look at what I saw yesterday, some of that type of language. That will never go down well. But for Trinidad and Tobago, we continue to manage the relationship, we continue to pacify, we continue to make sure that we're able to do the deals. I have been in contact in the last 24 hours with the leadership of the government of Venezuela.
The opposition leader had called for the procurement regulator to be involved in that process. Has that happened?
The procurement regulator, if you look at the law, the procurement legislation, right, I believe is the Procurement and Public Disposal Act, you will see that the regulator does not have a direct role in disposal of state assets. What the law says in layman's terms is the minister, meaning the Minister of Finance, may introduce regulations. Cabinet is actively received advice on that, and we've actively said what we believe the policy should be and asked the Attorney General to work with the external attorneys as well as the draftspeople in the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs to produce the regulations with respect to the disposal of public property. And this government is following the law and will continue to follow the law.
The procurement regulator, because they have...
The regulator went to Parliament before a joint select committee and said, I believe on live broadcast television, that they were consulted, that the regulator was consulted. We also had the evaluation committee go to them at the outset. That was said in the previous round when we addressed this in September, that at the outset there was consultation. But the regulator just listened. The regulator said, okay, go ahead. I wasn't there for the discussion, but it was not for the regulator to stamp approved or to say not approved, because the regulator doesn't have a role to play in current laws, I understand, in the disposal. But what we are addressing is we're utilizing the laws that exist, because even if there are no regulations under the Act, the law still exists. Trinidad and Tobago, from the time it became independent and a republic, has been disposing of state assets. Anybody who gets an HDC house, an HDC property, a lease from the government, that is disposal of state assets. So that law continues to be in place. When the government goes out for an IPO, a public offering of shares, that too, and we continue to follow the law as is.
Position of Trinidad and Tobago if the United States government terminates the OPAC licenses for dragon and coquina manicure?
We will continue to be engaged as we've done before. We will continue to be engaged. Our job, certainly I believe, my job as a responsible member of government and as a concerned citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, is to remain engaged. If we had listened in 2019 to the Ministry of Dragon dead and all those types of rhetoric, we wouldn't have gotten what we got. We are the only country that got OFAC licenses. We are the ones who got the go-ahead. We have a 30-year license for Dragon from Venezuela, 20 years from Coquina. I can give the assurance to the people of Trinidad and Tobago standing here today, this role and the future role, that I will fight for Trinidad and Tobago. And I will do all that I can advocating for Trinidad and Tobago. If that happens, as can happen, it could happen in the next 24 hours, it could happen 2 weeks from now, or it may not happen. I'm not going to give up. Because that's not what you do when you have the responsibility for Trinidad and Tobago.
In fact, do you think Mr. Rubio's statement in...
Anthony, if you know me by now, I don't speculate. So I can't say what impact, etc. I can only say what I know.
Question, if you don't mind. The question is, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago as partners in this endeavor.
Correct.
What do you think the impact on those partners is going to be on this statement by Mr. Rubio?
Secretary of State Rubio. Anthony, they are our two partners in this are Shell and BP. Shell is the largest LNG trader in the world. We are fortunate to have a partner in Shell. Same thing with BP. This week you would have seen BP come out of London, the CEO, and talk about a reset that is in our favor, saying, hey, we're going to invest more heavily. I can tell you, the person in charge from London has already been in touch with me. because we have that type of relationship. The last time I was in London a few months ago, we spent 7 hours together discussing the future of Trinidad and Tobago and me pushing and pressing for more investment here that is taking place. So they are concerned. They operate in many jurisdictions around the world. They operate in jurisdictions sometimes where there is war and conflict. So this is something that we are accustomed having to deal with. Is a very fluid situation. We continue to remain engaged. They are partners. They use what leverage we have. We use what leverage they have.
Is dragging possible without the OPAC licenses? Is Dragon and Coquina Mannequin, are they possible without those licenses?
You want to join other people in trying to get me sanctioned or something? Anthony, we will have to take legal advice on that. Right now, we know what the law is. Right now, we don't want to run afoul, but we will continue exactly as we've done, managing the relationships for the betterment of Trinidad and Tobago. Right? Okay.
We're just taking every opportunity to channel, in terms of the U.S. government, talks with them. Does not having a U.S. ambassador currently to Trinidad and Tobago, does that pose somewhat of a challenge?
That is part of the normal transition when you have a change of administration. So at this stage, the answer is we remain, I can tell you, even before coming in here, we're in constant contact with the personnel at the U.S. Embassy. We have an excellent working relationship with them. They guide us as best as they can, and that is currently taking place. Would it be more advantageous if you had an ambassador here? I suppose. But I don't think we are hindered by that, and it will come as they get around it.
Trinidad and Tobago ambassador in Washington affect the deliberations with the Trump administration?
I don't think it does, having an idea of how these things go, but our intention is to have an ambassador installed back in Washington as soon as possible. So not too much should be read into that. It is something that is very much on our priority list.
The refinery, sorry, Mr. Young, Joey Bartlett with Tuesday. What percentage of local labor would be proposed when the refinery starts?
Good question. So those are the types of details that have to be worked out. But I can tell you, one of the things that I was quite pleased to hear from the Orlando group over the period of time was 2 things when they visited the refinery. The first was they reported that the preservation of the refinery has been excellent. And I was happy to hear that by an independent player. So they said, hey, it has been very, very well preserved. The second is they said the level of expertise that exists in Trinidad and Tobago at the local level, which is what you expect. We ran the refinery. We, Trinidad and Tobago, ran the refinery. They said there is a minimal need for external labor. They said all of the persons they need to get that refinery up and, to get it running would be here. Obviously, you would, I assume, have to bring in foreign subcontractors to do the work to get it back into a serviceable state. But the running of the refinery, they reported how impressed they were by our local talent here.
One second. You mentioned that you have been spearheading these negotiations with President Maduro for the past few years. Are you uneasy with everything that is happening right now? And if this Dragon gas deal falls through, what is plan B? What is the diversification plan?
Those are 2 separate questions. Am I uneasy? The answer is no. Because part of leadership is, as things come at you, you have to be able to assess, do what is responsible, and make the right decisions. So to me, this is just par for the course. With respect to diversification, we will be rolling out, in the not too distant future, the plans for diversification. This doesn't affect diversification. This is something very specific for the energy sector. We would like Dragon to happen. We would like Coquina Mannequin to happen. We still have Loran. But fortunately, as I've said many occasions, all our eggs are not in that basket. Manatee is on stream. Manatee is a huge gas field and is the largest investment for decades. If you've been following, you would have seen BP talking about the BP Mento project with EOG. So there's a lot happening in the industry. Dragon coming on will help boost us back to levels where we would like to be. So that's why we continue to focus on it. And also, It's an opportune moment to explain to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Cross-border gas has to be part of our future, and that is why we're spending so much time, so much effort, so much energy on it for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So all of those who are screaming, attacking, wishing it the worst and trying to destroy its possibility, I guarantee you there is nothing that they can do that will reverse the production profile. We've gone out with our deep water, we've gone out with the bid rounds, which fortunately for us have been successful within recent times. We're working with the industry in a way that has never happened for the past few decades. You're seeing the results, so you've seen the commitment. All right?
We have seen what has happened with, as you would have given us a history of Jindal. If this is to happen again with this company, how is the government going about, or what will the government do to reassure the country that we are sticking to the course with the lease of the refinery? Because we saw what happened with where Mr. Jindal is concerned.
There is nothing the government could do that could guarantee that. What this government has done, what we've shown, is we have the ability to engage international entities, bring them to Trinidad, get them interested. That's why I use the sandals example. Sandals is a fabulous product. You look throughout the rest of the Caribbean. What did the opposition choose to do in Trinidad and still beat on their chest about it? Is to run sandals. They did the same thing to Mr. Jindal. So it's us, the citizens, who will have to decide, is that acceptable or is that it is not. We continue to work with operators once they fulfill the due diligence, etc. And that's what we'll continue to do.
How much so far has been spent to preserve the refinery, and do you believe that, are you confident with the lease agreement that it may somewhat recover that cost?
What has spent in the preservation was a decision to keep the refinery in a preserved position. As I told you a short while ago, I'm happy to report that they think it's been preserved well. I don't have the exact figure as to how much has been spent. TPHL at the appropriate time can provide that answer, because I'm expecting that once they do their part, they too will come and face the population and say what it is, with what has been discussed, how they're proceeding to go forward, etc. That is not something that's going to be hidden by this government. TPHL will be required to come and talk to the population to see which is the direction they're heading in. Last couple of questions.
For the asset integrity report,
They will pay for it. Wanda, that is part of the deal. They must pay for it, and we had to be satisfied that they would be able to cover that cost.
Government invested thus far in the Dragon gas deal.
Time and effort. I mean, I don't know how you determine that, because there's certain people who will say, as I saw them saying, look, Young Flow was there 13 times and this kind of thing. The amounts that were paid after we got the license, which is what I assume you're talking about, that will have to be provided by Shell and NGC, if it can be provided. Because again, you have to understand, they negotiate one license with us, they may then negotiate one with Anthony, one with Ms. Ramdas, and then it may be two different sets. So they may be charging him X and charging her Y, and that is how it works. That is what competitive. So I don't know what is the amount negotiated. I'm not even sure they would, paid. I'm not even sure they'll be able to say that.
Meeting with President Trump at all? Have you tried to get a meeting with President Trump or Mr. Rubio?
At the appropriate time, those requests will be made. We are putting things in place to be able to facilitate a deeper discussion with the United States government and administration. There's a lot happening. Stand by. When that time comes and I address you all on that, I will.
or would it encompass
CARICOM? Again, that is speculative. Let's wait and see what is the first opportunity. Let me leave that. Okay. I'd like to thank you all very much for your time, and I want to use this opportunity because we are going into the Carnival weekend on Monday and Tuesday. First of all, to thank all of those who have been involved. It has been well organized, well orchestrated, safe, and I'm asking the population, please stay safe, please be responsible, please be aware of your surroundings. Let's make sure and have a great carnival. I'm wishing everyone all of the best, those who partake, those who don't, have a bit of a rest, and I look forward to engaging you all in the not too distant future. Thank you all very much.